Hi everybody, we have a special episode this week for you just for our YouTube viewers. Did you know that Stella and I have a listener community where every week we answer questions submitted by our audience? These short episodes are recorded and released for members only, and we cover a broad range of topics there. This week we decided to share a couple of those questions and answers with our YouTube viewers. If you want to listen to or watch all of the previous episodes or submit a question of your own, please go to widerlenspod.com and click on Listener Community. There will be some exciting new community features coming soon, so now is actually a great time to join. Plus, it's a really good way to support our show so that we can keep producing full-length episodes for free. Now here is that Q&A episode sampler for you.
Hi, I'm Stella O'Malley, a psychotherapist in Ireland.
And I'm Sasha Ayad, an adolescent therapist in the United States.
Through in-depth interviews, personal stories, and psychological exploration, we probe the gender landscape within contemporary culture.
And we consider the implications of prioritizing personal identity over other aspects of the self.
This is the thinking person's take on gender.
Join us as we look at gender from a wider lens. Hi there, Stella.
Hi, will I read out the latest parents' question?
Please do.
My son is innocent and has become the focus of attention of a bunch of badass, sassy, cool girls who are treating my boy like a doll, and he is really into it all. He was flirting with trans identification anyway, but now he is absolutely loving all the attention. My boy is like these girls' prop, and I don't know what to do.
Oh boy, literally. Well, I think we've touched on this in the past, and I think we titled the episode something like, what can be better than like this kind of attention, or something along those lines. Because in terms of the parent, what you can do, good luck trying to compete with that. But I also feel like this is an old story, which is, particularly with the boys, and this happens too with girls. Like, I have a sweet kid who's always been like a mama's boy or a daddy's girl, or like this kind of compliant, well-behaved, pretty innocent kid who's, because of that innocence, somewhat socially vulnerable. She can get led into situations that she doesn't really understand. He can get manipulated by girls who are clever and like intimidating and beautiful. And so I don't think this is a completely novel situation with the trans issue. It's just taken a bizarre turn, because a lot of parents would look at this and say, my son, he thinks he's a girl? What? He's always been like a very typical guy. He's maybe not the jock sports kid, but he's into video games and he's kind of a typical masculine boy. But I think the seduction of getting this kind of ticket into the secret world of girls is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And I think I've talked about this before too. It kind of reminds me of that scene in Grease where they take Sandy when she's like she's had all these problems with her boyfriend or whatever, and he kind of has been ignoring her, and they take her, and she's in her poodle skirt and her like little good girl stuff with her books, and they like give her this makeover where she gets sexy and badass, and she's in leather, and they tease her hair or whatever. And there's something initiatory about that, and I feel like for these boys it probably feels like a cross between a sexual relationship and a level of intimacy that is blowing his mind. Like, these are probably not boys who have been some kind of successful Casanova, like charming the pants off women. These are probably awkward boys who don't really know like how to flirt or how to be sexual with a girl. And they're probably feeling very awkward about all of that. So now all of a sudden, the girl that you like is like brushing your hair and like putting clothes on you and telling you how beautiful you are. I can't even imagine the seduction. So
you're right.
Yeah.
You're so right. I think I remember back. It's just given me when you were talking. It's given me glimpses of memories of being in my teens and my 20s, and once in a while, Halloween or whatever, you'd dress up the boy, and the boy would be thrilled. It was they loved it. We were primping them, and they loved it. It is slightly sexual in a very unsexual way. There's something. It's intimate and funny, and you're right. It's opening a door of intimacy. And that these boys have never touched. Often they've never had any sort of thing. But what to do about it? Oh, good luck trying to get into through. Yeah. What, other than seethe with rage, which I know an awful lot of parents are like, get away from my child, please. And you won't compete. What mother's going to compete with any, 16-year-old who's effectively getting a sexual hit that you wouldn't know was a sexual hit? That would be how I would see this. And an intimacy that you wouldn't know. So I don't really know what parents can do other than try and expand them in other directions while knowing this is going on. I don't have a lot to offer her other than that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, a couple things do come to mind. We had talked in a previous episode about like having a kind of toxic friendship and how you can just try to talk to your kid about healthy friendships or point out to them, like, how does that make you feel? And you could take a similar approach here. You could have a very kind of subtle comment of like, wow, your new friend Jessie, she's beautiful, isn't she? And just, see what he says. And it sounds like she's treating you like one of the girls. What does that feel like? Like you could ask those questions. Now, again, I don't think that is going to create some sort of self-awareness that supersedes his sexual interest in Jessie. Like, you're still going to lose that battle. But it is a little bit of self-awareness, because I think sometimes, well, a lot of times, when you're a teenager, you don't really understand like how flexible you're willing to be for love or for sex or for intimacy. Like, I mean, how many times have you just bent over backwards doing the most stupid thing to get someone's attention that you like? I mean, it's just pathetic. I mean, I've done it. Everybody's done it. So having that question in your mind, even if the kid gets a little bit defensive or is like, whatever, mom, no, it's not like that. You've all of a sudden gotten him to think about it, even for a moment. So I almost feel like the best you can do is attempt to create a drop of self-awareness. I don't know.
I agree. You could frame that. That's exactly a drop. but one last thing, maybe a drop of self-awareness of, I'd say it's very intimate and pleasurable being attended to in that way.
Yeah.
They could stick that in somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I say, let's think in general about what's happening here, and maybe you make an observation about that. So like in a case like this, you might say something to your son like, I'm so glad that you've made some friendships that feel so fun and so exciting. And I just want you to know it's very normal for us to change things about ourselves in order to fit in or in order to maintain a friendship. Like, you may not even have to tie it to his friends, but that's a general statement that's true, right? Like, when you're young and you like someone a lot, it's common to change things about yourself in order to get that person's attention. So again, it's like you could say that, you could just drop that in somewhere, you could make it totally unrelated to his friend, but it's just to get the wheels turning. Again, it could drop maybe of self-awareness.
And don't expect any response, just.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think a lot of times parents say, which is very true, I can't tell if what I'm saying or doing is helping. And, with a situation like this where really it's like good luck competing with those girls, you have to trust the process a little bit, that if you are able to say a little something here or there, make an observation or have a conversation with your son, that even if 10% of it sinks in, you've made a little bit of an impact. And I think that's something commendable.
And I always say, I'm sure I've said it 100 times, but it's like pebbles in a barrel. You're throwing pebbles in a barrel and one day it'll fill. And they will have taken in quite a lot of what you've said. But it will take some time. So you're just flicking another pebble in. Rather than, I think we can feel very deflated very easily because we perfectly worded the point. And they've completely dismissed it. And then you can just think, what's the point?
In one ear and out the other. But can I ask, as somebody who has a son who seems to be very sweet. I mean, he seems to have this very sweet personality.
He is.
What will you do, or what have you done in situations where you think he's become infatuated with someone? Like, has that happened yet? I know he's pretty young, but like, what do you think will happen when you encounter a similar scenario that, God forbid, I hope has nothing to do with gender?
I think it's a very relevant question because I think, people can get into dynamics in relationships and parents can look on aghast. And I think parents have to realise they have to yield to the situation, because if you try and intrude, you're going to wreck it. So you have to yield and you have to trust that your kind of your outside influences in other ways is going to kind of win the day. Not because that's the best strategy, it's because it's the only strategy. Because if you try and jump in, you're just going to create so much trouble that you're going to wreck things. That you can't jump in and say, your friend is toxic and they're wrecking you. You can't do that. So what you have to do is do the other strategy, which is trying to build self-awareness around the relationship in a roundabout circular way, not going straight in for the jugular. And I dread it.
Can I say one thing? I mean, I have encountered a couple of scenarios where there was a really young boy and he was like slightly autistic, traits and very poor social communication skills, and was clearly being pushed, kind of manipulated into the trans identity when he didn't want to be. Like, I remember consulting with a family who, through looking at his text messages or something, realized he was being kind of dragged against his will into the identity. So that's a little bit different. But in a scenario like that, I mean, if you see your son being pushed into something that actually he's kind of uncomfortable with, I think then it is appropriate to kind of jump in and say, we can see that you're being forced to be someone who's not yourself. Like, your friends are not letting you be yourself, right? But that's different than the seduction, which is totally, totally different. But it just kind of, I thought about that because I've seen the innocent kind of aspy boy get into stuff like that. Yeah. And that's really scary.
So if the child is into it, you play one way. But if the child isn't into it and needs a hand in getting out of it, you help them get out of it.
That's right. Hi, Stella.
Hi, Sasha. Well, I go straight into a question here.
Sure.
A number of friends have said to me things like, maybe you just need to accept your child. I think there's confusion between the difference between acceptance and affirmation. I accept my child for all her wonderful and interesting talents and quirks, but I feel like affirming her trans identity is the opposite of acceptance. But I don't know how to explain this to people in a way they will understand. Any ideas? I have to say, I really liked this question because I think it's the nub of so many parents are given this wall of misinformed, well-meaning adults, and it's so distressing for the parents. It's like, oh my God. So I actually think how the parent formulated it was one of the answers. It's like, yes, I do accept my child. I accept my child and all which is why I think heavy medical intervention is questionable.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But for some reason, this seems glib for me to say. You put me in any other decade, and they would say everybody would understand me. So it's kind of well, that's when we have to go back into, if you were talking to, I come from a Catholic background. If you were talking to a Catholic, you got used to understanding the parameters of their understanding, if you follow me, and that they believe in something here, if you follow me. And I think it's the best way to understand it. But I do think parents should assert, I fully accept my child. It's the choices and it's the heavy medical intervention that I'm worried about.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That it's something like
Yeah.
that. It'd have to be just one sentence or two sentences. And, I adore the ground my child walks on. I think, her quirky, gender non-conforming personality is a joy in so many ways. I'm just concerned about heavy medical interventions, and I'm concerned about harming her body when she's in the midst of exploration rather than at the end of exploration. It feels
You're
premature.
you're right, but I think built into the question from the
Okay.
friend, like the maybe you should just accept your child, is a lack of understanding about the bridge between social affirmation and
I know.
medicalization. Like I
I
remember
know.
when you and I and Lisa were planning to do a training for a school. You've done a lot of school trainings, but like one of the things we talked about was these schools don't really understand that the way adults respond to the trans identification
I
can
know.
directly build a pathway right into medicalization. So I think some parents think, well, accepting that she identifies as trans now, she's young, she's not medicalizing, so what's the harm?
You're
It's
right.
kind of like ties into the social transition and like why people should be concerned about that and like hesitant about it. People don't realize the connection. And it's
Yeah.
not always the case. Like we know young people all the time who kind of desist before
Mhm.
medicalizing. So I don't mean to say social affirmation
Okay,
necessarily
I'll
leads,
go again. I'm going to
right?
try the
But you
same.
see what
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
saying,
You
right?
know,
Like
you're
I
right.
think
And I'm
your
glad
answer is great.
but it's
But
not
people
because it's
don't get
only
it.
for
It's
the
great for
medical. Yeah.
people who know, like who
And it's
know
great
the difference.
for a kid who's talking about medicalizing. But what about all the kids who are social transition? It's all about names and pronouns and stuff like that. So go again.
Okay,
Something along
go
the
again.
and then you're on the hot seat after me then. So
Okay.
something like, I fully accept and love my child. I adore her. I think more than anybody else on earth. But I am concerned. Back off, stranger. But I'm concerned that people aren't seeing the full person and they're just seeing a gender identity. And I see the full person and I see certain challenges that I'm not convinced other people who don't live with her and love her as much as I do are seeing. I think I see
Yeah.
a bigger picture here.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's great. I think that's great.
Mm,
Um I I would say, I mean, what you just said is perfect. And I think I would maybe even flush out something like I completely love and accept my child, and I appreciate that she's in an exploration place right now. And what I don't want to do is close any doors by rubber stamping what might be an exploration. So I'm trying to make sure she has some grounding in herself so that if she ends up going this way or that way or being non-binary or being trans and then needing to return, that I haven't closed that door for her.
yeah.
And I think that's the thing. Like, I don't remember if it was you or someone, like someone was talking about how acceptance sounds so positive. It's just such a euphemism. But there's a really serious
That's a
difficulty
very
about
good point.
saving face that happens when we get people to buy in and call us the new name and like tell us we're right. Like that's a huge burden of responsibility on a 15-year-old, being
Mm,
told that like you get to make a final decision about your whole identity. Like that's a lot. So it's
mm,
like actually adults can inadvertently put children in a very difficult position if they just kind of follow along with every point and stop on their exploration journey. It's like, you're on a map. Like you don't want to stab like one particular part of the map with like a knife. It's like, that's the end point. Like, no, we're just going to follow this path where it goes, but we stay grounded. We're the
yeah,
adults.
that's such a good point. You're so right. I think I would zero in on what your point was there. I think something along the lines of, I'm going again. I love my...
You're going to have like 12 scripts after this
I'll be still
episode,
saying it
person.
tonight, you know? I love my child, and we're often most conservative about the things we love most in the world. So I am probably more cautious about my child than I would be about your child, for example, etc. And that's human nature. However, I accept my child, but acceptance doesn't mean I accept all the decisions and all the choices. My job is to make sure, more than anything, that I keep my child safe and I keep her mentally healthy. And if I think something isn't very kind of happiness inducing, it's my job to kind of weather that. It's my job to say, this is prickling and this is really unpopular. But sometimes it's the parents who have to make the unpopular decision. It's the less involved parents who can just nod along. And so it's a gift of love to not just nod along. It's really difficult and it's exhausting me. But this isn't coming from some sort of resistance or bigotry. And I would sometimes say that word because it's somewhere hovering in the background. So if you say it, it's kind of like bringing it out. I'm a great believer. Bring it out, say it out, so that because I didn't mean that. It's like, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just to kind of call out explicitly what your friend is alluding to.
Subtly. Yeah.
You know, I had a conversation in therapy not too long ago where I had to actually ask my client, do you know why I take the stance that I take about medicalization? And my client had no earthly idea. And it's like, oh, you know, sometimes we're so in the weeds with like explaining these esoteric concepts about gender identity and all this stuff and the trauma and the ROGD. It's like, do you know that actually none of these medical interventions have any scientific backing whatsoever, and there's serious harms and osteoporosis and like sexual health problems? Like sometimes we forget that these are, it's like we've been put in the defensive position so much that we forget that actually we're on the correct moral ground here. This is a medical intervention with no scientific evidence that it's good for people.
And that's where...
Isn't it weird? Like, we forget that.
We've been put on the back foot. And that's where we need to put ourselves on the front foot. And the way we do that is we bring up the conversation. So imagine it's hovering silently between yourself and your friend. And you know they're thinking it. And you're not bringing it up and they're not bringing it up. You'll be on the front foot if you say, you know what, I just want to say something because I just feel it's between us. And I just want to say, you might wonder about some of the decisions around my child. And then you go into it and you say your 3 sentences and you might finish with, so just in case you're thinking I'm being narrow-minded, this isn't narrow-mindedness. This is care, caution and love.
Yeah.
And then stop, because if you don't stop, you will start talking for hours and hours.
That's my problem. I don't know how to stop. And once I get going, it's over.
I think I would, though. I think I would go on the front foot, go in yourself, rather than being on the back foot where you're in the defensive. I think there's something quite empowering about that, but it's really tricky.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. We went somewhere I didn't expect. I think that was good.
Yeah. We hope you're enjoying this episode of our podcast. We work very hard to maintain high quality content for the show.
To take an even deeper dive and support the show, join our listener community for access to exclusive content, practical tools, and resources supporting gender and identity exploration. We're so grateful to our sponsor, GenSpect, an international organization which offers an alternative to WPATH, providing a range of education, resources, and supports to anyone impacted by gender distress. GenSpect unites many different organizations globally and gives voice to thousands of previously untold stories. For more info, visit genspect.org.
And thank you to our sponsor, RHYME. Rethink Identity Medicine Ethics is a non-profit organisation dedicated to improving long-term care for gender-variant individuals. Visit rethinkime.org to learn more.
And now back to the conversation. Hello.
Hi there. Have you got a question?
I have a question. How did you know that I had a question? Isn't that miraculous? Okay, here's our question.
I had a feeling.
Okay. Every time I try to bring up a difficult topic with my daughter, it triggers an anxiety attack in her. How can we navigate communication strategies with a trans-identified child who's so sensitive that she can't even handle talking about these issues? Even when she initiates the conversation, she can get so overwhelmed and panicky. When she becomes overwhelmed, I sometimes respond with tension, and I also panic as I frantically try to figure out how to respond appropriately to help calm her nerves. And other times I think to myself, seriously, can't we just have a normal conversation?
The pain.
Yeah. I hear from a parent with this exact scenario probably like twice a month. Like, this is so common.
So common. There's a lot in this. I think there's so many sentences I wanted to pull out in that. You see where it says, how can we navigate communicate strategies with a trans-identified child who is so sensitive that she can't handle talking about these issues? Part of me thinks, well, that she's got into a very negative coping mechanism, that she falls into an anxiety attack whenever anything uncomfortable has arisen, is actually the more accurate sentence there. This isn't about being sensitive. This is a very negative coping mechanism that she's got very used to. That would be my read. And so therefore, I would be very interested in talking with that child about avoidance and about avoidance as a strategy, about defense mechanisms, about coping mechanisms, about healthy coping mechanisms. Rather than talking about anything about gender, these is where I would want to go. But then I thought the pain in the last few sentences, I kind of bled for the parent there, and I thought, my most, I want to hear what you're going to say in a sec, but my most strongest urge in this is that parent needs help to ground herself, if you follow me, so that she can start this long road into helping her child being able to grapple with difficult, because there's a dance here. The child freaks, the parent responds. It's a dance. It's a really, really frightening dance that is so common. Don't think this isn't common. It's really, really common. But I'd love that parent to have somebody, whether it's a therapist or some sort of coach or something, helping them navigate difficult conversations, for starters.
So that the mom can be like, okay, she's freaking out, but I don't have to. It's okay. It's almost like, this is going to sound very woo-woo, but it's almost like if you can be a calm, stable presence, it can help to regulate and de-escalate the other person, actually.
Totally.
Because when you start to get worked up, it feeds that kind of frantic energy.
And that's when it gets into a prison, because the parent knows, I'm supposed to be relaxing, but I'm not. I'm freaking out. Oh my God. And now it's all, and then it's, So I totally get it. I have lived this. Yeah. But that's why I think, look for support for yourself. Whatever about the kid getting support, I wouldn't be so interested in that. I'd be much more interested in the parent getting it to kind of start to begin the new way of communicating, and it'll take time. I would give yourself a lot of time for this. This isn't going to be done in a day or a month or even 6 months,
Yeah, I had a conversation like this recently with a parent who, like, her child was exactly in this pattern, and the mom described that, she had a kind of background in her own childhood history, which was challenging, but she said, like, I vowed to never let my children feel overwhelmed or burdened, because she had been so burdened, so, but then we were talking about how this particular child, when she would go to her sport, she was like involved in sports, she was confident, she was capable, she was strong, she was doing this, like, and I said, isn't it interesting that she never has panic attacks when she's in her martial arts class? And it's like, oh yeah, like, you're getting swung at, like, with fists and you don't have a panic attack. But when mom says, like, I'd like to talk to you, you have a panic attack? Like, that's disproportionate, right? So there's something about this which it can be a bit of a blind, it could blind the parent to the fact that this is in some ways an escape strategy. Yeah. Not that she's doing it deliberately, but like you said, it almost becomes a pattern that you're physiologically, like, respond to. Like, every time mom wants to have a hard conversation, if I tense up and clam up, I start to get nervous, I start to get panicky, and then I don't have to have that conversation anymore.
It's
And it
so
becomes
automatic.
like kind of ingrained. It's not like a
Yeah.
deliberate thing, but it becomes a pattern.
And it turns into almost like the equivalent, the physiological equivalent of a phobia. Every time I
Yeah.
see a mouse, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you, duh. And
Mm.
that's why I say I wouldn't go towards the child yet. I talk to the child about defense mechanisms. There's lots of conversations to be had, but I wouldn't go near the
Mm.
gender. But also the difficulty of talking about difficult issues.
Yeah.
That's an interesting conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
what brings on panic and what doesn't. You know what I mean? And where's the strength and stuff like that. It's really interesting how many parents are so kind of, in a way, determined to have. I'd love to do research on how many of these parents were determined to give their children, as we all are, a very, very happy upbringing. There's a fear of conflict and a fear of distress among many, many RGD parents. Now, I'm not sure, I don't have any research to back this up. It's just a noticeable trait. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very interesting to me how often I hear that there's a huge fear of conflict, just in general,
Mm-hmm.
in the person, in the
Mm-hmm.
parent.
Mm-hmm.
Do you notice that, or what do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking about Lisa Duval when she came on the program to talk about this. She definitely talked about this fear of, upsetting the child, and it becomes it's almost like in the book that we wrote, in my chapter I talked about parenting styles, and it's like you can actually end up adopting a parenting style because of the temperament of your child too. So there's probably a bit of a cycle here. So it's like this kid might actually be prone to anxiety. And
Yes,
if this kid
often.
was a bit more robust, mom wouldn't be panicking herself,
Yeah.
right? So it's a bit of a dynamic that feeds off itself. And so that's why I think your advice is so good to like get your own support first, because one of you is going to have to take this knob and turn the dial down, and it's probably not going to be your daughter.
It won't be your daughter. It will be you, or it won't happen. Also, framing the child as so sensitive, I don't think that's
Mm,
the correct. I'm really into accuracy, and I'm wondering, yeah, she might be sensitive and she might have negative coping mechanisms. This mightn't be about sensitivity, really. This might be about an extreme urge to silence, and it's not manipulation. I think it's unconscious. I really do. I think it's an
yeah, yes,
unconscious
yes.
determination to silence the conversation. And I think it's very powerful in ROGD kids. They are so
Yeah.
silencing. And why are you hurting me? Is their question.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think parents need to kind of gird themselves and get some kind of what's that? The Swedish minister during COVID, he said, I have to have ice in my belly. Always stuck, sometimes you
Oh,
have to
that's
be so,
interesting. Like
yeah,
fortitude or something? Is that what
yeah,
he was
just,
alluding to? Yeah.
you know what I mean? I have to, because it's for their good. It's eating their
Mm-hmm.
greens. This is important.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
when they are into their big emotion, and that parent, I'm just trying to help the parent, and the parent is just going to, it's like, I have to have ice in my belly, and I'm going to leave the room because I'm just getting into the dance. She takes step one, I take step two. We're going into the fires of hell here, and I have to go. I'm going to come back in a second. I'm just getting myself a glass of water, and I know you're really upset. Just leave to come back in, or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Cut the dance, because it's so destructive.
Yeah, I agree to kind of gather yourself. And I think what's really important, like I studied behavioral modification and kind of
Oh
behavioral
yeah,
therapies for a long time. And one of the things we learned, I mean, I don't agree that this is the whole picture of how human behavior works, but behaviors serve a function. And there's usually an antecedent, and then the behavior, and then there's a consequence. And
okay,
in a case like this, if we were just using that lens only to the
yeah,
exclusion of everything else, we'd say, well, let's see, what is the behavior here? The behavior is the panic attack. Okay.
okay,
The antecedent, the thing that happened right
yeah,
before, is mom approaching with a challenging conversation.
got
But
it.
what's the consequence? Because the consequence is what maintains the behavior. So if the consequence is you get to completely opt out of that difficult conversation, what we've done is we reinforce that particular
Totally.
behavior in that particular situation. So I would encourage this parent, again, to kind of get your own support first, know when you need to take a break, but be very mindful to have the expectation of yourself and your daughter that we are going to complete this conversation. So if, and I shared this with a parent recently, if your daughter starts to have that panic attack, you might consider saying, I know this is hard for you. I love you, but we're going to wait it out until you're ready. Like, I'm going to stay right here. And if you need to take a moment, that's fine. But when you're ready, we're going to finish this conversation, so that it doesn't become a pattern of complete avoidance every single time. Frankly, that doesn't serve mom and that doesn't serve daughter. So if you're willing to kind of tolerate that heightened emotion, to kind of stick it through and complete the process.
And I would do a little bit of I think that's brilliant, but I would do a little bit of psychoeducation beforehand to have said about unhealthy coping mechanisms, about this, antecedent kind of behavior and consequence, and explain for your own good, when you next have an anxiety episode, I'm going to continue. So just so you know, that's going to be very difficult, but just so you know, and it won't be coldness from me, it's from a place of love, but it's trying to make sure that if I don't, I am harming you by allowing it to kind of entrench further. So just so you know, you might be really upset and you might up the ante and you might get even more anxious, which is very likely, by the way.
Yes.
But I'm probably going to sit tight and try to continue it, or I will continue it, just so you know. So they're well warned. So that you could say, as I said, I'm going to, because we have to try different ways. So I'm just going to sit tight here. And you might go out, get your glass of water and come back, but you are sitting with it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And it'll be very difficult.
Hi, Stella.
Hello there. Here we are at a parent question and answer.
Yes, we are here with our Patreon exclusives, and I will go ahead and read our question for today.
Yeah.
So, hello, Sasha, and Stella. Thank you for your work. My eldest child is a daughter who is recently turned 17 and has identified as an FTM, non-binary, for 2 years. My husband doesn't read up or listen to anything like your podcast, but also doesn't want our child to transition. However, he said that we should let our child try testosterone before 18, which happens to come before graduation. I can see the benefit of doing so, since we could care for them and hopefully we'll all see whether or not they're ready to live apart from us at school, which is often in question. We have an initial appointment in April at Stanford with a pediatric endocrinologist. I'm asking if I should keep the appointment and keep presenting the dangers to our child. It's a big one.
Okay, yeah, I'd say the first thing that comes to my mind is about trying testosterone to see if it suits as a concept.
Yeah. Yes.
That's what jumps out at me, because I think I wouldn't underestimate the euphoria that testosterone can give people initially. It can be very energizing. Your libido can shoot up, which feels very energizing as well. It feels very empowering. You can feel very clear-minded and strong. And, also there's an extraordinary, almost purpose in life, because you've got something to prove. Not only you're on a path, but you have to prove that this path is the right path. It feels like of all the tests to do in this scenario, and I don't know if tests is the right word, but all the ways paths to try, that one feels like that's not something I would recommend, trying testosterone.
No. Yeah, me neither. I mean, I think sometimes parents hear like Helena's story that like she took testosterone and it made her feel really terrible and sick, and kind of use that as hope. Like I've talked to several parents lately who say, I'm hoping that when she starts the testosterone, she won't like it. But actually, you're bringing up something very important, which is that biologically, testosterone can energize you. It can make you feel strong. It can give you a sense of, it's like a mood elevator. So this is probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, once you step into that gender clinic, you are on that pathway. So I find it
it's kind of like if you think about this almost as like an addiction or something requiring a detox or like a fixation. You're sharing your concerns with your child, but you're also in a way kind of asking an addict to self-manage. You're putting her in the drug house, the gender clinic, and you're asking her to take responsibility while she's pining after something and set her limits for herself. And 17-year-olds, generally speaking, as you know, you wrote about in your book, they can't do that anyway very well. I mean, not that it's impossible, but generally speaking, young people are not very good at estimating risk or thinking long term. They want what they want now, and they will take high risky behaviors to get it.
Yeah.
So my impression in general is like families need to get really clear on what they think and just hold that boundary. And it doesn't mean your child is going to like it. And it doesn't mean they're going to be like, you're right, Mom, I agree with your wise decisions. No. But that's kind of where you meet the child with your boundaries. And then, of course, soon enough, your child will be old enough to make those decisions. But I don't know if that's how you see it, but that's what I think.
I do, and I don't think it will please the child in the short term, but I think it could be good for the child in the long term. And I know they're 17, nearly 18, so maybe I shouldn't say child. But I do think, she does, I know I've read the letter, she does mention autistic or certainly, diagnosis with, and so there is a kind of, they're less mature, there can be a lack of maturity, and the person might be more vulnerable and need that little bit more guidance. It feels like, maybe with the father, and I don't know him, but it feels an easy route to say, I won't read anything, sure, let's try it out anyway and see if it works. You know what I mean? It feels to me like that the mother must be carrying a big burden there, and I could see how she could be so exhausted, feel on both sides. We've got a father who isn't reading it and then saying, "Sure, try it," and you've got a young person pushing the door down. That the mother could just feel exhausted and say, "Okay, then let's go to this. Let's give it over to the doctors and see." I would say, if at all possible, stand your sacred ground. Really, try to hold the line. Just because I would think you're playing with fire. It's almost like, the invincibility that the anorexic feels when they lose weight. And if you said to them, "Go on then, lose this stone that you want to lose. See how you feel." How they feel when they lose the weight isn't the same as how they will feel 3 years later. Like this is a long game. It takes many years for many people to come to detransition, if they will come to it can take 4 to 7 years often. I do think some people feel awful on testosterone. There's no doubt about it. Some people feel phenomenal. I remember Carol, who we interviewed, I think episode 9 or so, 10, and she said she'd wake up in the morning thinking, I could walk up a mountain 10 miles. The energy, do you know what I mean? Well, some don't feel that. But I think it's very hard to hold the line, and I think I can understand why the parent is feeling like, I'm being attacked by all sides. Will I just go? Keeping the appointment equals, will I medicalize? Will we medicalize, I think.
Two things. I think sometimes parents fantasize that we're going to get to this appointment and the chronologist is going to share in the subjective way what the short and long-term effects are, some of which might be scary. And there's a possibility that in that meeting, in that appointment with this doctor, my child will hear something that makes her hesitate. So I think sometimes parents have that fantasy. And I guess like another thing, I think you're right about this mom probably feeling really exhausted. And it's like, when you're swimming upstream, but everyone else is willing to go that way, it's very tiring. So I really empathize with this mom. But whenever I meet families in this position, I will often ask them, what are you afraid might happen if you hold the line? And then often what comes up is usually kind of very sensitive things around parental authority, maybe there's a history of serious mental health problems or self-harm or suicide. Maybe the young person has threatened, either credibly or not, that if you don't let me have this, I will run away, or I will never talk to you again, or I will kill myself. Like, sometimes there are concrete things that the parent has a reason to think may happen. And that's so hard. We don't have that context.
Yeah,
but I can imagine
question.
the exhaustion.
That's a very good question. What are you afraid will happen if you don't keep the appointment? Maybe if the parent did a bit of free writing about, well then, let's go there. What will happen if I keep the appointment? What am I afraid is going to happen? Now, what am I afraid is going to happen if I don't keep the appointment? Just to kind of realize there is two choices here. But I do think this idea, I think you've so nailed it. There's a fantasy, no matter how many times we talk about affirmative care and some extremely kind of frightening stories of just being shuttled down a factory kind of line, people think that seriously isn't going to happen. We'll get a good clinician who will actually talk some sense, because we've 17 years of sensible behaviour from clinicians. Why would this be different? Well, there's nothing for me to think that this would be any different than the classic, straight into the pronouns, straight into the medicalising. There's no reason for us to think it would be in any way different than the usual affirmative model.
Yeah. I would also say to this mom, get yourself some support. Meet other parents who are like-minded, connect with other people. I know, in my parent group, we have a Discord and there are channels based on location. So I know some parents have actually met up, people from the same town, and become friends. Lovely. And it's huge, especially if you have a partner or a spouse who's not nearly as engaged as you. It's really lonely. So I would say this mom also needs to find support for herself. Yeah. It's really hard, but I think we shared our views on keeping the appointment.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us this week on Gender, a Wider Lens. Listener support means a lot to us. If you enjoy the show, please like and subscribe on iTunes and leave a review.
For more information, visit widerlenspod.com. There you'll learn about joining our listener community, how to contribute to our show, and where to find us on social media.
Our discussions are for educational purposes and are not intended as a substitute for mental health services.